What is going on, my Atomic Auto Works friends? So here is an update on the 65 Mustang paint. So we started to sand and buff it. The paint is still a little soft. So you can see there, this here is the trunk. So it's black, it's shiny. But when it's soft, it shrinks up a little bit, and we're gonna have to come back and sand and buff it a little bit more. But it has a really nice reflection. You can see there the car in the background. And we also did the hood. So here is the hood. And obviously this is the lights and the ceiling. It looks really nice. So as soon as this dries a little bit, this thing is a dust magnet. Black is a dust magnet. So as soon as this dries good, we're gonna give it the final buff. Maybe a little bit more sanding and buffing, but as you can see, it has a beautiful shine. Black really is like incredible when it's done properly. Today, I'm working on a 1965 Mustang. We're actually doing the hood and the trunk, and we're trying to get it block sand ready for the final coat of primer so that we can get it painted for our customers. So I want to kind of go over two sides of the restoration business. One, customer perspective, and one, the restoration shop's perspective, because this is a good example of what happens a lot in this industry, where a car will go to a shop and they'll be kind of lied to. And a lot of shops want to tell the customer everything they want to hear. If you go to a shop and they tell you everything you want to hear, run, because they're lying to you. It just, you have to be realistic in what you're dealing with, what you're doing. So this specific car, the customer was taken advantage of. They actually paid in full for a restoration. The shop quoted them a price, whatever it was, and didn't get what they wanted. So now that we have the car, we have to kind of fix it, correct it, and we really want to make our customers happy. And we want to give them the best bang for their buck, best quality for what they pay for. And so with this one here, we had to really assess it. So what had happened is it came in, and through pictures, we saw that they did strip most of the car down to bare metal, which was great. There were some areas that they didn't, which we were able to go through and actually strip them down ourselves back to metal. But the car wasn't primer, and they did do a little minor body filler here and there. What's cool about it is we took a mill gauge across every part of the car, and it was very, very minimal amounts of material on the car, which is great because that's less for us to have to worry about failure underneath it. We don't know what they used for primer, but because it was so little, when we block sanded it, well, what we first did was we sprayed a guide coat, which I'm going to show you on this trunk. We sprayed a guide coat over the entire primer that they had, and we blocked it out. We cut, I would say, probably 90% of their primer off, and we started hitting bare metal in a lot of spots, but it also revealed a lot of minor low spots everywhere. So now, because it's already in primer, we kind of throw our normal start to finish system that we do out, which normally we would strip it to metal, put it in epoxy primer. From epoxy primer, we'd actually do all of our body filler. When we do that, we skim everything, block it, and we actually sand it with like 80 grit, 180 grit, 220, and 320 for the body filler. And then from there, we would put our primer on it. And at that stage, the body filler would already be level, and then we put our high build primer on there. We would block that high build primer with probably 320, 400, and 600, 500 grit paper and get that ready for paint. Because this one was already done a little backwards, I didn't want to have to go through and skim coat it and body work the whole car, because one, the customer's going to pay us a lot of money to do that. And for this scenario, it really wasn't super bad. So what I decided to do was use our Evercoat 4:1 high build polyester primer. It's almost like a body filler. It's pretty thick, thicker than primer and thinner than body filler. What I wanted to do is, I didn't want to go through and start putting body filler on there, randomly sanding it, because you go backwards and it's a lot of time. So by doing this, we just primered the whole thing in this. We did 2 coats of it with a 2.0 tip. So there's a lot of material on here. And then we're gonna guide coat it again and block it out and see if we get rid of most of the areas. So far on this side of the hood, we actually have 90% of it was good. It sanded out, blocked out good, all the guide coat sanded off, but we still have 2 lows. And the way you do it when you're sanding body filler and primer, you sand until you see metal and you stop. If you see metal and you keep sanding, you're actually causing divots in there. So I saw 2 spots, very minor. Most likely if I primed it again, which we have to, and sanded it, it would go away. But what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna put a real tight skim coat of filler on those 2 small areas, sand those down so that when we put our next coat of primer on there, we're really in a good direction and very close to getting ready for paint. So with that said, I'm gonna start sanding this, and I'm gonna show you how the guide coat works. So there's basically 2 types of guide coat that we use. One is a spray can and one is the pounce pad. I'm gonna show you both of them. It's personal preference. I like the spray cans. They don't last as long and I think they cost more money. But all you're gonna do is put even coats of, you spray it on there so you can see the difference of it. Some people put this on very light, some people put it on heavy. I like to kind of go right in the middle. I like to make sure everything's covered because if you don't cover it and there's a small imperfection and you don't see it, it could come through. And then you also have the powder, right? I'm gonna shake this up, so the powder, you can just brush that on there, which that's a lot. Normally you don't put that much on there, actually. Came out. So what we'll do is we're gonna do both sides. I'll do one side in pounce and one side in spray. And then we'll sand it and show you the difference. It's here. I always have a table or something next to you because you don't put stuff on cars or on things you're working on because they're not a shelf or a workbench, they're a car part. We want to make sure that they look really good. So now we can actually start sanding this. This stuff dries super, super fast. Now we're going to begin sanding. So we're going to say, I'm going to do right through both these here so you can see the difference. So for me, this spray shows up a lot better. This is a more faint, so this is more contrast, more black and white. So you can see as we're standing here, one, we're getting, you can see the orange peel basically from putting the primer on because we did use a 2.0 tip, so it's very thick and it lays out with more of a texture to it. But we're gonna cut that right off. So what we're doing is we're standing, always doing different directions. You can do cross hatching, you can do circles on these ones. It doesn't really matter. You just don't wanna go in the same direction over and over again. So we're gonna stand here with no pressure. If at this stage, when you're block standing for guide coat, if you're putting pressure down, you're moving the metal. And if you're moving the metal, you're actually gonna put dents in it. So with no pressure, we're just gonna sand. So this primer here, as I said before, the longer you let it sit, the better it sands. This probably should sit for another day or two to sand better, but we're making a video, so I'll sand a little bit more. So as you can see, I'm not putting any pressure on here, and all the imperfections are going away. You see, there's one little tiny one there, there's a bunch here, and obviously over here we didn't hit. So we're just gonna keep going, moving in different directions, no pressure. We're gonna sand all this off. Now you can see here, here's a big low spot in here. There's actually a couple minor chips in here. What I wanna do is see if we have enough material. So I don't care how much we sand off of this. You sand it until you see metal and you stop. And this way we'll get it nice and thin. Guide coat's really good for a visual to see the contrast and highs and low spots. But you also still have to be able to use your hand for feeling and really pay attention. So on this one here, what ended up happening is it looks great, but when you run your hand across it, you could feel that the panel is actually mounded. Mounding is a very common thing you get for people doing body work, especially in the beginning. What happens is they'll put too much filler on and sand it, and they'll sand it till it's smooth, but what they're doing is they're adding too much material and they're actually adding waves. So even though we're sanding it with a guide coat, it's not showing the proper level of where the filler should be and the highs and lows because it's mounded up over it. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut this down until I feel like there's no mound here. And obviously if we hit metal, then we know we got most of the material off. See here, the guide coat does an awesome job of showing little stuff. So like right here is a couple of little tiny pinholes that were in there. So we're gonna see if we can just sand those right out, which is good because we still need to sand here. Even though it's smooth, I wanna try to get as much of this material off as I can and only leave what we need in the areas that we need it. You see here is a little bit of a low spot here as well. Probably hard to pick up with the camera because this powder, the pounce powder, isn't as defined. All right, so I just actually cleaned everything off with a solvent, and this primer is really good. I don't know why everybody's not using it. I only put 2 coats on it. The reason I only put 2 coats on it was because if you do 3 or 4, whatever, the thicker it gets, the longer you really need it to let it sit and dry and air out and get all the solvents out, which, you know, for 3 or 4 coats of that high build, you probably should let it sit for a week before you even start sanding it. I put 2 coats on it, and believe it or not, the 2 coats pretty much got 99% of everything out. There was only 2 low spots that were a little bit too low, which honestly, if there was 3 coats on here, it would have sanded out. So now we went from 180 grit right up to 500 grit sandpaper, and it's ready for its actual final prime. We're gonna put this in a black primer so it's sealed to the same color that we're gonna be painting the car with.